Killers who showed no remorse to victims' families in court. A serial killer who is remorseless and does not experience any remorse for their actions is the most terrifying. Although some murderers have endeavored to seek redemption for their crimes, some genuinely cold-hearted monsters lack empathy entirely. These are the murderers who have never expressed regret for their actions. Merciless murderers such as this would probably have continued their criminal activities indefinitely had they not been apprehended by law enforcement, as evidenced by their heinous trial behavior. Killers who are wholly devoid of empathy and lack remorse. That is the issue at hand. Fiends of unadulterated evil who had no remorse for their actions. This list delves into the most malevolent and inhumane serial murderers. They not only failed to offer an apology to the families of their victims, but they also frequently took pleasure in their actions. It is almost as though they derive sick, twisted pleasure from their amoral stance on unthinkable offenses. Rader. Dennis Rader, who was more commonly known as BTK, an abbreviation for his modus operandi, bind, torture, kill, was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in 2005 for a series of murders that occurred in Wichita, KS, extending back to 1974. Rader, who was also a Boy Scout leader and church deacon, stunned the courtroom during his trial by gleefully recounting the grisly details of his crimes. He exhibited a smug, almost sexual gratification in the retelling of his murder rampage. He elaborated on the strangulation murder of 24-year-old Shirley Vian, stating that he had initially confined her children to another room in an attempt to maintain their silence. When this failed, he forced them to witness the execution of their mother. We relocated them to the restroom. She helped me. I subsequently secured the door by tying it sealed. To ensure the children were as comfortable as possible, we added a variety of items, including comforters, toys, and other items. She secured one of the bathroom doors so that it was impossible to open. Subsequently, we pushed. She returned and assisted me in pushing the bed against the other bathroom door. Subsequently, I secured her. She became ill and vomited. I obtained a glass of water for her, offered her some solace, and subsequently bound her, placed a sack over her head, and strangled her. Richard Ramirez. During the summer of 1985, Richard Ramirez unleashed a series of violent incidents that caused widespread panic in Southern California. The Texas drifter, who would become known as the Night Stalker, committed a series of violent acts, including beating, raping, strangling, shooting, and slitting the throats of his victims. He maintained that this was a form of worship to Satan. Ramirez delivered a remorseless, chilling monologue after being convicted of 13 homicides and 30 other felonies, a body of work that sentenced him to the gas chamber. You don't understand me. It is not anticipated that you will. You are not capable of doing so. I possess expertise that surpasses yours. I am beyond the realms of virtue and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer resides within each of us. That concludes the matter. Stephen Griffiths. Stephen Griffiths, a PhD student in criminology at Bradford University in England, aspired to achieve renown that transcended the confines of academia. Griffiths' malevolent aspirations were inspired by his idol, Peter Sutcliffe, who was more commonly recognized as the Yorkshire Ripper. In 2009, Griffiths initiated the first of 3 homicides, a series of crimes that would reverberate throughout Bradford and earn him the self-explanatory moniker, the Crossbow Cannibal, in pursuit of a form of infamy that would secure his place in the chronicles of history's greatest mass murderers. A CCTV video was released in the English press shortly after Griffiths' arrest, depicting him celebrating the murder of his final victim, 36-year-old Susan Blamers, by giving the finger directly to a camera in the entryway of his apartment building and holding up his crossbow. The video, which was as disturbing as it was never shown in court. Griffiths, who was anxious to confess to his crimes, graphically described how he dismembered his victims in his bathtub before consuming pieces of their flesh. Franklin Joseph Paul, a neo-Nazi serial murderer. Joseph Paul Franklin is perhaps most renowned for his fatal shooting of pornography magnate Larry Flynt. Franklin, who began his spree in 1977, murdered at least 15 individuals, despite Flynt's survival of the attack. The death penalty was imposed on him for the murder of Gerald Gordon outside a synagogue in Street Louis, even though authorities suspect him of being responsible for as many as 22 racially motivated homicides. Franklin would later attempt to justify his crusade to CNN, stating, "I felt like I was at war. despite never demonstrating an inch of remorse in the courtroom. The Caucasian race's survival was at risk. I regard it as my 3-year mission, the same period that Jesus was on his mission, from the age of 30 to 33. John Wayne Gacy. Between 1972 and 1978, John Wayne Gacy committed 33 murders in suburban Chicago, IL. He was a serial murderer and rapist and may have been the reason why clowns are often regarded as creepy. The contractor and part-time children's birthday clown would entice teenage boys back to his home with the promise of partying or construction work opportunities, only to rape, strangle, and bury them in his crawlspace. In 1978, Gacy was eventually apprehended by the law after a concerned mother reported that her son had vanished with the man. Although Gacy would later recant and joke at his trial that the only thing he was guilty of was running a cemetery without a license, he would confess to detectives the full extent of his offenses. The tribunal convicted him of committing numerous murders and sentenced him to death. Gacy was executed in 1994, and his final remarks were a succinct reflection on his life and crimes. Kiss my ass. Carl Panzram. Some individuals regard Carl Panzram as the most sadistic serial murderer in history. The Minnesota native perpetrated a total of 21 murders and an unknown number of rapes, all of which were committed against juvenile boys and men. He committed his crimes in the United States and the African country of Angola, where he claimed to have killed 6 local guides before feeding them to crocodiles. Panzram was ultimately sentenced to death at Leavenworth Penitentiary in 1930 after he used an iron bar to crush the cranium of a fellow inmate. At the time, he was serving a 25-year sentence for the murder and rape of 2 boys. His final words were, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard," as he hailed his execution with anger and defiance. In an autobiography that he left behind, which was written by a cellmate with Panzram dictating, he recorded his final words. These nihilistic screeds exhibited no humanity, not even for his most horrifying crimes, such as this infamous passage. Albert Fish. Albert Fish, who would later be referred to as the Gray Man, committed as many as 10 homicides in New York State between 1924 and 1934. In 1935, he was ultimately found guilty of 3 offenses, all of which involved young children. Fish, a paraphilia, an individual who pursues masochistic sexual gratification, possessed distinctive fetishes, such as the act of placing kerosene-soaked wool in his anus and igniting it, as well as the act of inserting needles into his abdomen and consuming copious amounts of raw flesh. After murdering, dismembering, and consuming 10-year-old Grace Budd in 1928, Fish subsequently developed an appetite for human flesh. In a callous letter to the child's mother, he provided a detailed account of his culinary process. Initially, I stripped her of her clothing. She executed a strike, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, and then dismembered her into small parts to transport the meat to my rooms. Prepare and consume it. The oven roasted her little ass in the most delectable and tender manner. It required 9 days for me to consume her entire body. Although I had the option, I refrained from sexually assaulting her. She passed away as a virgin. Fish did not even attempt to pretend remorse during his trial, instead boasting that he had a child in every state. Even when he was finally sentenced to the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, he declared his final moments on Earth to be the supreme thrill of my life. Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, widely known as the Butcher of Rostov, is the most successful serial murderer in the annals of Russian history. In a horrific spree of violence from 1978-1990, he killed 53 individuals, 35 of whom were children or young teenagers. This spree of violence places him among the worst mass murderers in history. Chikatilo, a charismatic family man, would entice his victims, who were often the homeless or disabled, from bus and train stations to the forests outside of Rostov. There he would rape, torture, murder, and mutilate them, occasionally consuming their organs. In November of 1990, he was ultimately apprehended, and he failed to exhibit any remorse during his trial, expressing only self-pity toward himself. "When I used my knife, it brought psychological relief," said the individual. "I was akin to a ferocious wolf. I have transformed into an untamed animal, into a beast." In 1994, Chikatilo was executed by a single bullet to the back of the cranium as a consequence of his atrocious crimes. He concluded with a profoundly humorous, yet unsettling, Appeal. Please refrain from destroying my brains. The Japanese are interested in purchasing them. That's about all. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Feel free to like and share, and I'll catch you in the next one.